He asks, has Asia altered its gene pool by eliminating large swathes of individuals with moderately low social anxiety?
Yes, I'll tell you how. It's actually a very good question. Ron Yuens wrote about this in a bachelor's thesis, a sort of honours thesis that he wrote when he was at Harvard under E.O. Wilson back in the 1980s. He's one of the first people to discuss culture gene coevolution, and the thesis was eventually published, believe it or not, as an article in the American Conservative. This was one of the articles that led to him being purged from the magazine by the various sort of excreta that had accumulated around this magazine after he founded it. But the argument he made was that if you look historically at China in particular, you can see periods where you have these emperors who were quite vicious in terms of persecuting individuals who didn't think precisely like they did on sundry questions. And they had this period in their history called, I think, the 100 Schools period. It was a period of great upheaval and problems. And it ultimately resulted in the dominance of the Confucian ideology and the almost complete destruction of the Taoist tendency in China. And this, he argued, represented a major culture gene coevolution event in which, essentially, a Chinese ruling class destroyed everyone who wasn't like them, and it meant that the subsequent generation would resemble them by default. He argues this process might have continued up until Mao.
Also, the Chinese emperors did tend to have a lot of children. They tended to have numerous wives and concubines, and the concubines would be rotated according to their place in the menstrual cycle. They understood such things.
It's the same with Mao Zedong. He retained that tradition. Indeed, when I was an undergraduate, I knew someone who now works on brain scanning studies who claimed to be a niece of Mao Zedong and a product of a sort of concubine, who was related to Mao through a mother or something, and had tons and tons of cousins because of this process.
So they've made themselves more K-selected in a way, and perhaps more intelligent as well through this.
Well, I think Marx once said of the Chinese that they are sort of stuck in these cycles of despotism. And I think what Marx missed was the fact that these cycles of despotism will have an inevitable effect on the genomes of these populations by culture gene coevolution. So, essentially, the despots presumably breed more despots, thus perpetuating the cycle, which would certainly explain why China's going the way it's going at the moment.
Yes, they don't have much of a questioning class, do they? I'm never going to go to China. If I were to go to a country that was Chinese, I'd go to Taiwan.